My name is Ben Ramseth, and I work in the Esri Defense and Intel R&D Center. And this is my colleague, John Yaste, and he works on the Python API team as a product engineer. We're here to talk about the ArcGIS API for Python, introduction to scripting your Web GIS, because that's what it's used for. So we're going to split it up. I'm going to talk first, do some demos, then John's going to come in and just do some serious work with deeper into some demos. We're going to keep it at an intro level, so don't worry about if you're new to Python or new to Web GIS or new to GIS in general. This is meant to be for everyone, so just giving you a rundown of how things are put together in the ArcGIS API for Python. And using it to script your Web GIS. So that being said, we'll continue forward here. And you might have well, it's actually a couple days ago now, but remembering the plenary and Rohit and Atma both doing some cool demos showing off the API. So they wow you with what's possible with the API. We're going to wow you with the mechanics of the API and how to get started. So how to get a real understanding of what's possible with the Python API, and like I said, the mechanics of how to get started and how to integrate it into your environment and integrate it to script out your Web GIS. So you know what's possible and at least a little bit of how to do it. So in this section, we're going to talk about what is the API for Python, what you can do with it, the GIS module, which is the gateway into your GIS. So that's a very important module. It doesn't matter what scripting workflow you're going to work with. Like if you're an administrator, you're a content publishing, you're a GIS analyst / data scientist, or a developer or power user. And later I'll talk about what all those user groups, what you would do with the API. It doesn't matter what one you are. You use the GIS module to get in and work with the Python API. I'm going to call it the Python API just so it's not as long as ArcGIS API for Java. See, I did it. ArcGIS API for Python. I work a lot with JavaScript also, so when I say that with our APIs and SDKs, it's easy to misstep and say the wrong environment. They're all wonderful environments, but this one is the ArcGIS API for Python. We call it the Python API because you're using Python to work with your Web GIS. And then we'll talk about install in the end of how to get started, because I'm going to show you a quicker way to get started where you don't have to install anything, so you can play around with things and get excited. And you actually could do it right now while you're sitting in your chair. And I'll explain how to get into that cloud environment in just a minute. So to start it out, the ArcGIS API for Python, or the Python API, is using Python and communicating with the REST API, or the ArcGIS REST API. So for those of you that might not be familiar with what that is, think of it, it's just endpoints or an entryway into your Web GIS or into the ArcGIS platform. So the Python API, you use Python with the Python API to work against those REST endpoints that have properties and methods of things you can do with the ArcGIS platform. And you might say, well, I've done that before with just regular Python code, or I've heard of people that are communicating with ArcGIS Server or ArcGIS Enterprise, ArcGIS Online, and they're successful with it. And that's true. You can be successful working and building your own Python script or Python classes to communicate with the ArcGIS REST API, and you actually can use any language to do it. It just communicates through standard REST protocols. But what the Python API is we built those classes for you. So we have a kind of a client API that will communicate with the REST API for you and give you a quick way to get in there and get started without having to be an experienced Python developer, or potentially be an experienced Python developer but not know much about GIS, and you can use the classes that we've already built. So to take a look at what this API is all about, it's a Pythonic GIS API, and what that means that it corresponds to best practices, has standard Python constructs and data structures that are clean and readable. And what that means is that as a Python programmer, like I said just a second ago, you can easily pick this thing up and use it to get into the ArcGIS platform and to grab just a little piece without understanding the whole GIS umbrella. But if you're someone that understands the whole GIS umbrella, you can also pick it up and not be a super experienced Python developer and be able to get in and use it and do things with your Web GIS. And there's a lot of modules that hold the functionality that you'll do to get into and use this API with your Web GIS. GIS being the big one in the light green, but then all other sub-modules that you may or may not use depending on what workflows you're looking for. So I'm going to bring it back again to what this Python API is, because some people say, Python API, is it a new thing that I can do the ArcPy stuff with? And no, it's not. The ArcPy is still a very important part of the platform. ArcPy is for desktop scripting. ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Desktop, or ArcMap. Why the Python API is for scripting against a Web GIS. So it does your administration, your content publishing. It also does analysis. You can script out the big data tools with it. Why on the desktop side, that's for basically doing geoprocessing. But also, for those of you that do work with ArcPy, you know that you can do some map automation, where if you're in the ArcMap, it's called the ArcPy mapping. If you're in ArcGIS Pro, it's called ArcPy MP. So other than that, the differences between the Python API and ArcPy is that the Python API is at the 3x version of Python, so the more modern language structure. Why if you're using desktop, you're using 2.7 in ArcPy. But ArcGIS Pro also uses the 3x version, the newer version of the Python language. Okay, there are 4 different user groups that we have. We have the org administrators, and that's typically the one that I see a lot of people having these workflows that they know they have and they know that they need to work out. Also, content publishing is very popular. You have a shapefile, you have a CSV, you need to load this stuff up. You have to automate it. Maybe you get data every week and or every day, and you need to automate the publishing of layers. GIS analysts or data scientists doing analysis and working with this thing called Jupyter Notebook, which is the development environment that you can choose to use with the Python API to do some very scripted out workflows and have a nice notebook of what you did. And then also the power user and developer, which might go in and just grab a small piece of the ArcGIS platform using the Python API. So a little bit more about those. So we have the org administrators, we have the content publishers, we have the GIS analysts or data scientists, and then across the whole gamut, the developers can really plug in at any time. So you might be a developer and you've been tasked with doing org administration or creating content in addition to your other duties. So just a couple workflows that you might say, okay, I'm new to this, what can you actually do? I know you can do org administration, but what does that mean? So if you have a new portal, you're standing up ArcGIS Enterprise and you're working with the portal part of it, and you need to put users groups. You might need to clone from development to production. You need to reassign user content. Let's say someone leaves the company and you want to loop through and find all their stuff and give it to someone else. Trying to do that in the interface is very tedious. So this provides an option to automate the process. And then do searching against your content. Also determine item relationships and create reports of users and their items. Also credit usage. You can lock down the number of credits someone uses or find out where credits are being used. And in a certain month, what kind of credits are being used out there and how many. Okay, and then automated content, basically content publishing going from shapefiles, CSVs, SD files, and going up into your Web GIS. And you can automate this and do it off peak hours, which is pretty handy. And replicating content from development into production, and updating broken links too. Let's say you have a bunch of web maps and you maybe have a service that's no longer available and you want to clean that all up and make sure all your web maps have the right content. And then the reproducible research, you'll see that the Jupyter Notebook that we're going to talk about provides a very nice way to model out what you're doing within your workflow. A little bit of like Model Builder where you have the different tools that you use. With Jupyter Notebooks, it's a scripting environment, so you have scripts and output and a map and all these different things that list out your analysis so you can reproduce it. You can also comment it heavily, or not even comments, but use Markdown to make sure that you have a lot of information about what you did. So when you do it again a month later, you can remember what you did. Okay, so lots of modules out there. Like I said, GIS is the main one, and then from there, depending on what you're going to do, different workflows you'll get at different sub-modules that are available in the Python package. Okay, we're going to do a demo. So this is a dev summit. We need to do demos. So I'm going to go into notebooks.esri.com. And this is a great location, and you're welcome to hit it right now if you want. We have spun up the total throughput of what's going on in here to make sure you can handle what you guys throw at it. But this is an online notebook environment. So it's not made to be a production environment. You don't want to do your production work up here, but it's kind of like for those of you that maybe have used the ArcGIS API for JavaScript sandbox area, it's similar to that. Just note that after 10 minutes of idle, if you idle it for 10 minutes, it's going to clear everything out. So you can go in here and you can do work, like you can go in and say, I want to do a new notebook. I can pull it up and I can type things in here. So I can say A equals 1 plus 1. And then you can, it's actually this button right here to run that. And then I could put in the letter or the variable A and I can run it again and I get an output of 2. Wow, 1 plus 1 equals 2. But that's just showing you the interaction of the Jupyter Notebook. And this is, like I said, on a cloud server that you can access it. I didn't have to install anything. I can play around with it. Also, in an environment similar to the ArcGIS API for JavaScript in the sandbox, you can go to File and you can do a download. So Jupyter Notebook has the ability to download it either as a notebook file, or you'll see later that there is a possibility that you might want to download it to a PY file so you can run the script through your OS and run it at any time of the night or whenever you want to run it. So you don't have to run your scripts always in Jupyter Notebook. You can choose to use your favorite Python development environment. Also, we have the ability to do, you see code here. I can also go in and change this into Markdown. So I can then do something like a pound, and we'll just do the word heading in there, and then we'll push the run button, and that'll run it, and you can see that you can write basically HTML using the Markdown shortcuts to put information in the notebook that you want to explain what you're doing. And you can put photos in here, you can put videos. It's a very rich environment. So that is notebooks.esri.com. And we're going to show you some more tips and tricks as we go along, but I want you guys to see where you can get at it, and it's an environment that you can play around. So a sandbox or a playground environment to explore the API without having to do the install. But we know that you'll eventually want to do the install because there's good stuff you get at by working at it locally and using it in your production environment. Okay, so getting into the GIS module. So the GIS module is the connection into your Web GIS. And yes, Jupyter Notebooks what it is it's actually a web-based Python integrated development environment, IDE. So John will talk a little bit more later about installing it. And once you have it installed, you can write code and you can get immediate response. So I'm going to show you how to get into your GIS now and explore your GIS system. Okay, the GIS module, there's the main module, and then off of that, there's items, there's groups, there's managers, there's users and roles. Those are a lot of administration kind of classes you'll use, but you'll go through some of those to get in and do the other things like analysis or content creation. And there's managers for each of these classes. For example, user, you'll have a user manager where you can create a new user. You can get a user. You can search for a user. So the manager classes are related to the GIS module and the other classes that you'll use to do your administration and to work with the classes you need to work with to get done what you need to do when automating your Web GIS. So I'm going to jump back into another demo here. So we're going to connect to the GIS now. I know you saw me type 1 plus 1 equals 2, but these I'm going to go into my local install now of the, oh no, that's not right. My local install of the API and Jupyter Notebooks and open up a notebook that I already created. I'm just going to run through it so you don't have to watch me type the whole time. So I'm going to do Shift-Enter, which is the shortcut to get in and use to run a cell in Jupyter Notebooks. So I'm going to import the GIS, that big module we talked about. We're also here, I'm importing GetPass, and GetPass is a way that I can hide my credentials, so when I log in, you guys don't have to see what my password is, so it's pretty nice. And also you can see here I'm connecting to ArcGIS Online. So when I connect to ArcGIS Online, I put in the ArcGIS Online URL and I put in my password, and then, whoops, I gotta do that again because I pushed the button and not meaning to. So let's do that. Talking and doing something at the same time. There we go. So now it should log in. And actually, you'll see it says GIS properties.user.username. That's showing what user I'm successfully logged in as. So I like to do that just to show that I'm logged in. I was going to crank it up in size, and then I did that, and then my password, I had to put it back in. But anyway, here I am. Shift and enter again, and that'll run that to get my user. And then I can do user first name, so you know you can put it in first name in quotes to return it, so Ben. And then you could also do the dot syntax. So I'm doing user.firstname, Ben, user.lastname, Ramseth. Wow, I know my name. That's awesome. And then I can also insert a cell. So I'm going to put a new cell in here because I want to show you something. I can also do user, and I do dot tab. That's dot tab, and I get at all. I get code completion for everything that's connected to user. So I can do dot, 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 however deep I need to go. So that's built right in. And then also, I can do a, not that one, but that one. I can put in a question mark, and I can do, run that cell, and that will pull up the help. Now this one's pretty small. Later on, I'll show you another one that has more information in it, but it shows up the help documentation coming from the API reference. Okay, so moving forward, we can also pull in other Python packages. So something built in is we have the IDisplay. So watch when I do Shift Enter here and what happens. It goes into my ArcGIS Online. I'm getting my content, and it displays it in a nice list. So I'm not just doing, I could have just a raw dictionary of all the values, but this gives me a nice little look and feel. I can click on this, I can see what it is. Once I click on it, it goes into my ArcGIS Online account, and you can see that this is the item, and I can get at and do anything I want to in here. So the iDisplay is a really, one of the nice modules to work with. And there's a number of them. So there's a number of things that you can use from Python in Jupyter Notebooks with the Python API. So that's the beauty of it. You can combine multiple different pieces of functionality from Python right here. So here's another, I did search already, so I'm just going to skip that line. But here I can do GIS properties. So you can see this portal name is ArcGIS Online. Do I have a custom base URL? No, I have the basic one. How many credits do I have? Okay, almost 3,000 credits. So they're just some of the things you can do when you connect to ArcGIS Online. Or, as you'll see, you can also connect to Portal or ArcGIS Enterprise. So I'm not going to run through all these cells here, but I'm just going to show you what the difference is to connect to ArcGIS Enterprise versus ArcGIS Online. So here for ArcGIS Enterprise, I'm putting in the URL, and that's my portal URL. Here's my password, and then I'm doing the get pass to put my password in again. And there's also other authentication methods, so in a minute I'll talk about that. It supports basically the authentication that you're using. There might be a little slightly different way that you authenticate based on what type of authentication you're using. If you want to talk more about authentication, come down to the island because we can get deep into what you need to discuss based on your setup. Because we want you all to be able to get in there and connect properly to your Web GIS. So I'm going to do one more demo here. And this is, I'm going to show you the interaction with the map control. So there's a map widget. Actually, it's a map widget, not a map control. Details. And as soon as I log in here again, there we go. And I'll do a Shift Enter here, and it's going to bring up the map control. Another thing you've noticed maybe is there was an asterisk next to my line there. So right next to in, it will say an asterisk, and then it will turn to a number when it's done running. So that's where you know it's running. Plus this little button up here is solid when it's actually crunching, and then when it's done, it goes clear like you can see now. So that's a little tip and trick to help you out. Also, we're doing a place location here. So you notice I push in New York, and it gets me to New York City. This is built with the JavaScript API here. So this is an embedded widget inside of Jupyter Notebooks. So the developers on the team have built this for you guys, and you can zoom in and out, and it's an interactive map, so you can interact with the data you're working with. So for example, here I'm going to see what the base map is. So I'm going to do map1.basemap, and it comes up as topo. So that's the base map I have. I don't want that base map. I want to use dark gray, so I just push that, and boom, I've got a dark gray base map. I can also set the zoom level, let's say to 4. So I'm going to do a lot of scrolling up and down since I zoomed in so you guys can see it better. And then I can zoom into 11, so that'll zoom me back into New York City. And then I can do 200 pixel height, and that'll make my map control really narrow. And I can set it to 1,000, which will make a nice big map control that fills the whole screen, or even more than the whole screen since I'm zoomed in on my display. And then I can do map center, so I can find out what the center is. It's at 0, 0. I don't want that. I want to zoom into another location. So now I've actually zoomed into East LA out here in California. And I decided that, oh, I don't want to go there. I want to go back to New York City. So now I've zoomed in back to New York City. So you can zoom around using commands. And then also you could create a new map. So I'm going to create a new map here so I don't have to scroll up and down as much. So a new map centered with the topo base map. Now I'm going to change the center point to be New York. And I'm going to put in a single line address here. And we're going to go in and geocode the New York City Esri office. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to bring in another module. So I've been using GIS module this whole time, but I'm going to bring in the geocode module. Yeah, I had the cursor on the wrong place. Let's try that again. Bring in the geocode module. There we go. And then also I'm going to pull the help. So you, in addition to the question mark, you can also do help. So I can go, and this will pull up. You can see this one's much more robust help topic. So we've got all this information from the API on how to work with the geocoder and what all the parameters are you need to pass in. So I'm going to scroll down here, go past it. There we go. And now I'm actually going to do the geocoding. I'm going to pass in my address that I put in there, and then I'm going to make a pop-up. So I'm going to make a custom pop-up for that graphic that's going to go on the map. And it's thinking. You can see that it went from the asterisk to the 18. Now one thing that is not done already is I haven't put it on the map yet. So I need to actually draw this or push this line of code in so I can draw it on the map. And then if I zoom up, I'll zoom up. Oh, got to go over to the side here. Zoom back up there. Now you can see it's on the map and there's a pop-up. But I'm zoomed way out to the world scale. So that's not what I want. So I'm going to set the extent to go into New York. So now I've got a nice look and feel, and I'm zoomed into where the Esri office is. Okay, so I'm going to actually shift gears. I'm going to grab some content now. I'm going to use the get command. I could use a search too to find something, but I already know what I want, so I'm putting in the GUID ID with the get command. So right now I have this DG item, which stands for disc golf, because I like to play a lot of disc golf. And I have a content item, which is a feature layer that's 18 of my favorite disc golf courses in Charlotte. So I'm going to make a new map that's going to zoom into Charlotte, North Carolina. And there it is. So there's Charlotte. Now I have an item that's in that variable for disc golf, but I haven't added it to the map now, or haven't done it yet. So in line 50 here, I'm going to go in and I'm going to click that, and that should add it to the map. Now another thing you have with data, even though this is not a web map, I could have added a web map into the map widget also, but this is a feature layer. I'm going to click on that, and you can see that you automatically get pop-ups. So it just does the default pop-up. So if you change your pop-ups in a web map, then you'd see the change that you do in the pop-ups. But if you're using a feature layer, you'll see the automatic pop-up that all the data is there and everything. And you can programmatically change that if you want to have it, the pop-up look differently. Okay, and then I'm going to quickly do some analysis here. I'm actually going to use the features module and do proximity. So the buffer that we've all done many, many times, and maybe we're even tired of hearing about buffers and we want to do some cool other analysis, which is all possible. But I'm going to do a simple buffer. So I'm actually going to call create buffers, and I'm going to buffer all the disc golf courses. I'm going to say, well, what kind of restaurants are close to these disc golf courses? So when I'm done playing disc golf, I might want to go out and enjoy either a beverage or some food in the area. So you can see I've returned that, and now you can see it's there. I have a feature collection. The buffer is a new feature collection that's stored in my Web GIS. I can put it, I jumped, there we go. There we go, I just put it on the map. So now I have my buffers on the map, and then from there I can do more with it. I'm not gonna, due to time, do anything more with that buffer, but that's just an entry point where you can keep going and intersect some restaurants or do whatever you're planning to do with your analysis. And one more thing here that you can also get at things like fields. So through that features module, there's a lot of connection you can do. You can actually even get in and do editing and work individually with the features, whether you're doing analysis or other things with those features in your data sets. Now you might have noticed like things have been jumping around, and like this output was already here. I didn't even need to push the shift enter to get it. And what I've done is I've mistakenly not cleared out all my outputs. So I want to show you how to do that. Up here in the cell menu, you can go to all output and do clear, and that clears everything out. So you can actually save these notebooks with the outputs in there. So if you give it to someone, they can see the output that you got when you ran through the analysis, or you can have it cleared out so they only see your markdown, your HTML, to give you all the comments and information about your workflow, and then also the code itself. So it's kind of up to you. You can have it either way. But now I've cleared it out so it's nice and clean. The note, actually you have to close down the maps directly. They don't clear out when you clear out the cells. But it's up to you if you want to clear those out or leave those in. Okay, so that is that demo. So I'm going to jump back in here and pull this up and see where we're at. Okay, great. One more thing I'm going to talk about, and again, I will just reference come down to the islands. We've had a lot of good conversations, and a lot of your colleagues or fellow attendees have asked some pretty complicated install questions, which have been awesome. So if you have anything about authentication or anything about connecting this to your Web GIS, come down the islands and we'll talk about it. But there's many of different authentication schemes you can use. You can also, if you are using Pro, you can use Pro you can grab your credentials from Pro if Pro's running. So that's a quick and easy way if you're a Pro user to log into your Web GIS using this Jupyter Notebook and the Python API. But other than that, you saw me use some built-in users, and I just put my username and password in there and got in and connected to it. Another thing I want to point out here is that there is a help topic that's available that has all this information right in the help. John at the end is going to show you more about where to get information in the help. And at that note, I'm going to turn it over to John, and he's going to wow you with some other stuff.
Hello, good morning everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, hi. What?
Switch the screen. Okay, good. Well, there we go.
Okay, I'm going to start off in the help documentation. So my name's John Yaste, and I'm recently joined the API for Python team as a product engineer. So what I'm going to talk to you today a little bit is Ben showed you about connecting to a notebooks.esri.com server and running some of these things. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about running the setup locally and what Anaconda is and how we distribute the API for Python, and then running some workflows for some of the different user personas that we've created. One of the things traditionally with Python, if you've written Python code, there's a standard library that is included when you install Python, and then there's also the ability to import modules that other people have written to get code that does different things than the standard library can do. And traditionally with Python, there's been different ways to distribute that code. And so sometimes the package management has been tricky because it's not standardized across how everybody distributes things. So there were different ways to get third-party modules into your system. And so getting different installations of Python and site package to necessarily play together could be confusing. So a few years ago, a company called Continuum Analytics created a product called Anaconda that made this kind of package manager application that allowed you to easily create environments on your system that isolated groups of Python modules together and didn't mess with any kind of system installation of Python. So you could create environments, install the packages you want to use, switch between those environments, and then manage dependencies of the different modules you're using much easier than having to do it all manually or using just architecture of folders and things, which was how things were traditionally done. So the reason I go into that is because the Jupyter application that we're showing is part of the environment that gets set up when you install the ArcGIS API for Python locally. And so for Windows users who have Pro, we are bundling some Anaconda functionality and creating an environment on your system. So at 2.1, when you install Pro, you have a Conda environment that has the ArcGIS API for Python and ArcPy accessible in the same place so you can interact with them. And it releases, but for non-Windows users at Mac and Linux, you can install, and also Windows users who don't have Pro, you can install the Anaconda software and get this Anaconda package manager and install the API that way. So I want to point you to the guide documentation that we've written. So most of what we talk about today is gone over in this guide and in these sample notebooks, which are accessible at developers.arcgis.com/Python. This is your hub for using the API. There are sample notebooks that you can connect to the notebook server and run this way, or you can download these locally and run them in your own system. And there is a page for installing and setting up this environment locally that talks about the different releases of Pro you may be at and how you get the API onto your system there, and also how you can get the Anaconda distribution onto your machine, create your own environments, and get the API into there. So I'm talking about that, and now I want to show you some workflows for the different user groups that we've shown. And I have Conda activated on my system, or have it installed on my system. And just to show you, there are different environments that I have set up on this system. And I can switch between these environments and get access to the different packages that are in those environments. And at right now, I have an environment active called current release, and you can see that prefacing the command prompt. So that's a way I know that's my active environment, and the packages that I put in there are now accessible to me. I've installed the ArcGIS API for Python in this environment on this Mac machine, and now I'm going to run the Jupyter Notebook command, which fires up a local web server and then serves up the content of wherever I started that from over HTTP in a web browser. And now what I can do is, I'm going to get into a browser I'm more comfortable with. Is I can start running notebooks from here and creating my own notebooks with this new command. And I'm going to go into some workflows that we've put together for org administration. This is a lot of questions that have been coming at the island the last couple days have to do with some of the stuff you can find out about your organization here. I'm just going to start with this notebook here about gathering some information about an organization. And I'm just going to run these cells. Like I can do shift run. I'm going to enter a password. Let me clear my output. I run that cell. This getPass module that Ben described uses a standard Python module that will allow me to run the notebook and hide my password when it's on a screen like this. So let me enter my password. and go down here and run this one. That tells me I'm connected to my portal. And then this code here is just a way I can get a list of the helper services in my portal, the URL and the names of the services. So if I want to run the functionality of my services, now I know the URLs to connect to through classes and functions in whatever web APIs or SDKs I'm going to use to access these services. Ben talked a little bit about getting remaining credits here. It's like, I've got some renewal to do on this organization, no credits in there. But I can get info about a logged in user, connect to get the me object, find out who that is, get their access property, what role are they, and what date was this created. Like, this is an epic time and you have to do some conversion with that. I'll show you a little bit about that later, right? I can get info about feature services in my organization, right? I use the search capability on the content manager, which there are managers accessible as properties on the GIS object that Ben talked about. This content manager will allow you to search and work with the content in your portal. So whoever you're connected as or however you filter your query, you can get different information from your portal. This query parameter allows you to construct filters on what's returned to you. And I'll show you some of that. This one's just returning 25 feature services from my org that this particular user has access to. And as you can see, I'm configured through this portal that I'm receiving feature services owned by the Esri Living Atlas user and other users at ArcGIS Online. If I want to filter that out, I can use something like say, okay, show me the feature services that are owned with an owner that does not begin with Esri. And if I create a list of those feature services, then I get something that this is data I'm more familiar with rather than those that are owned by that Living Atlas user. And then I'm going to go in and, okay, let me take a look at what web maps are in my organization. And so this is a list of all the different web maps I have access to. And again, I'm going to filter out that I want to see the ones that I own in particular. And so now I've got web maps that I own, and I'm going to take a look at this fourth one down, and I'm going to draw this map on screen. And because I want to take a look at what this looks like. So these are some of the ways that you can gain access to information in your portal and use the API to draw that content. So there it is. This is the web map, and then you can interact with it and go and do some different things with that once you've got it in the notebook. So now I'm going to switch gears to a different notebook. This is one where I'm going to connect to a different organization, enter in my password. Typing in front of people, it's amazing.
You too?
Me too.
Crazy.
Okay, so I'm connected to this organization. Now I'm going to run a query I'm going to generate a list of all my users and find out when did they last log into the organization. So, and as I took, Python returns the date to you in this epic time, which is some ginormous integer. And you can use this date time module to create objects from that number that then become human readable for dates that make sense to us instead of computers. And with Python, don't forget you have to divide that value by 1,000 or it's not going to make any sense. So this is a list of users in this organization and the last time they logged in. And now I'm going to generate a list of all my content in this organization. So there's 517 items that I've got access to. Now I want to take a look at, okay, what different roles do I have in there? And with this one, I am This looks much neater on a smaller screen. This one I've generated, this is a list of all the users, all the items they own, the type of item, when it was last modified, and the number of times these items have been viewed. So you can get this kind of information and then do with that what you need and figure out maybe what users you need to talk to. They're not logging in, they're not making use of the system, or whatever you need to, however you need to manage things in your organization. One other admin workflow that I want to run through is, okay, let's connect again. To this org. I'm going to generate a list of all the web maps in this organization. And then what I want to find out is the name of the web map and then the feature layers that are contained in it, and then either the ID or item ID value of the data that's within that map. So there's a list of the web maps and the items that it contains and the ID or item ID, the GUID value of that data in those web maps. And from that I can sort of do that in reverse too. If I know the GUID ID of a particular item in my portal, I'm setting that to a variable, and then I am going to generate a list of where that item, of what web maps does that item appear in my organization. And so I've run that code, and ultimately we're going to get some output here. At least I was last night and even this morning when I ran this. So these are ways that you can get information from your portal. Like, there's a lot of administration capabilities in this API that make it a little more straightforward, I think, than managing all this and getting all this information through the REST API directly, which you could do with straight up Python. And so here we go. We're getting some output from this web map, or this particular layer listed at the top. The name is Specialty Clinic, appears in these different web maps in this organization. So that's some administration workflow that you can go through. So now, let me go in and let's talk a little bit, show some things about ways you can publish content to your organization. So again, let's connect to the organization. And yeah, and as Ben talked about, however you've implemented security in your organization, there is a way for you to connect, to set up this GIS object with your connection properties. And then, so I've connected to, this is a one-person organization I have through one of Esri's free developer and testing subscription plans. So I've connected to that organization. I've set up a variable to a CSV file on my system. I'm creating a Python dictionary of properties for this CSV item, and I'm setting some properties and information on that, and then I am going to add this item to my portal. Okay, so there, this is I gave it this title, and now I have that item in my organization. And now I'm going to publish it as a service, as a layer in my organization. And then we're going to go and get some information about this layer and then draw it onto a map. And so this is publishing right now. As you can see, when you're in a Jupyter Notebook, if you have an asterisk in this little cell here rather than a number, and this area up here, this dot here, is solid instead of hollow like this, that lets you know that the Python execution environment is processing something, and that cell's working and not done yet. So that item is now published, and there's my item icon in my portal. And now I'm going to go search for that item, and there it is. And now let's draw it in the map widget, and we'll take a look at what does this data, we'll get a rough overview of what this data looks like. So there I've got all kinds of points representing emergency calls in the city of New York over a certain time frame. So that's publishing from a CSV. I can also do that same workflow with a shapefile. I'm getting better at typing my password. So now I'm linking to I'm setting a variable to a shapefile path on my system that is zipped up, and I'm going to add that to my portal. There's my item. Now I'm going to publish it. I can add some markdown. Like, this is one of the cool things about Jupyter. Ben showed you this a little bit. This is a way you can add, that's one of the values of Jupyter Notebooks as instructional materials. You can add paragraphs and explanation to things that are going on, have the code right below it, and then see the execution of it all in one place, which is one of the real values in using this environment to sort of get immediate results for Python code. So now here's my displayed published service item. I'm going to go search for this, make sure it's in my portal. There it is. And we're going to do the same thing, draw it. So that workflow, that pattern of sort of accessing data that you know where it's at and publishing it is fairly straightforward. You add it to an item of your portal. You add it as an item to your organizational subscription, to your portal deployment, or to your developer subscription organization, add it as an item and publish it, and then you can draw it here. Now you have that feature service and can go use it in this environment or any other environment that, or any other API or SDK you want to use to program against that service. Okay, so that is some content publishing examples. What I'm going to do here is go into, take a look at some GIS analyst workflows that we've put together. And I'm gonna go back to this, to the home page of the developer, the API for Python hub, developers.arcgis.com/Python, and go into this sample notebooks tab. All these notebooks are available as a GitHub repo that you can download to your system and then mess with them on your own. Or you can go to notebooks.esri.com and all of them are available there, and you can, we already went through that. You can download these to your machine one at a time from here, right? So if I open one, I'm going to open this weighted overlay analysis one, and we'll go through and take a look at what happens on this in this notebook. But I want to show you, like, in a Jupyter Notebook, you can download the file to your system. So you can download it as a notebook that then you have on your system, and then you can fire up Jupyter wherever you store that notebook and run it. You can download it as a Python file and stick it in one of your IDEs and point your IDE at the interpreter where your whatever modules you're using in that script are. Point at that and run it as a script. So If you've got a lot of extra information in the notebook, that'll all be commented out in your script. So you might have to go through and do some cleanup that way. But so let's take a look at this workflow and show you what the notebook is capable from an analyst perspective. So a weighted overlay analysis, what we're going to do is take a look at, I'm just going to walk through, there's some background of like a weighted overlay analysis is a way for you to get sort of disparate information into a standardized format, add data together, overlay it, and produce some output that gives you some additional information. And what this notebook goes through, and it sort of makes the claim that, hey, if you are a traveler and you're going to a natural area, it's much easier for you to travel in the lower elevations areas where the slopes are relatively moderate and where and you want to go places where people haven't messed everything up, right? So you want to see the mountains and the rivers and the lakes and the pretty stuff. So we're going to get some information from ArcGIS Online and combine it in a way that then gives us an output and shows us which areas in a certain location are the best to go to based on that criteria. So we're going to import the GIS class to our notebook, and we're going to connect to a aptly named Python playground that we've set up. I'm going to grab a human modified index imagery layer from ArcGIS Online. And here I see that item there. Now I'm going to grab a national elevation data set from ArcGIS Online. And now what I'm going to do is get an outline of the United States, all the 50 states in there, and grab that item. And I'm going to grab the layer from that item and store it in a variable called states layer. I'm going to query that states layer for just the state of Washington, and I'm going to set that to a variable called study area query. That's my study area, the state of Washington. And then I'm going to grab the geometry from the output of that query through this syntax, right? In importing the features module from the API and grabbing the geometry that way, and then getting the spatial reference and setting that for my study area geometry. And then I want to get the specific coordinates of that study area. So I geocode the state of Washington, and then I grab the extent from that and print out those values. This would have worked a little better had I cleared the output before running through this. But it's running, trust me. So this human modification for North America layer, now now we're just looking at the extent area of the study area we're interested in. We're just looking at that for the human modification index layer. We're going to do the same thing for the elevation layer. And then we're going to import the whole slew of raster functions from the ArcGIS Python API. And that's in a module called raster and a submodule called functions. We're going to import all of those. And then we're going to run some raster functions on this elevation layer to produce a output of the slope. We're producing a slope output raster from that digital elevation input. And then we're going to clip out the geometry of the state of Washington that we grabbed earlier from each of these rasters. So I clip it out from the human modification index raster, clip it out from the elevation layer, and clip it out from the slope layer. And when you're performing a raster overlay analysis, right, those values aren't going to make sense if you add them together. Adding together elevation, slope, and whatever scale the human modification index is using, those values aren't standardized. So we're going to normalize all this data so it makes sense to add them together to produce output. So we're creating a color map to display those things, and then we're running the remap function of taking the original pixel cell values and mapping those to, we're producing a range of values in a new raster output and symbolizing it by that color ramp that we just created. So I'm doing that for all 3 of these layers. And I'm going to go assign weights to my different criteria that I'm deciding and looking at my analysts, right? I think it's much more important that humans haven't messed up where I'm going so I can see the pretty stuff. And I'm also weighing the slope and the elevation, giving it different percentage values there, scaling that, and looking at my output there. So that was a step-by-step analysis doing that. You can do that in the raster notebook. And I can do all of that also in one step. And there it is, the same output. And then I can also, I'm going to run through this really quick because now we're getting to the end. You've been sufficiently wowed, I can tell. You're kind of freaking out, I can feel it. Okay, then I'm going to draw the results on one map.
Thanks for sharing your analysis, John.
You're welcome. And then this is a kind of cool one that I didn't know about. You can display it side by side there too. But again, these samples, just showing you some of the possibilities of the API. I think the administration capabilities are really cool and really powerful to be able to get that kind of information, particularly that stuff about finding, oh, I've got a layer, where can I figure out where it's used and who's hitting it and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there you have it. You are now sufficiently introduced to the API for Python. And so we're at the island the rest of the time. We've got 5 or 6 minutes for questions. Ben will be happy to help you out with those.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, go ahead. If you have ArcGIS Pro 2.1 installed, you do not need to install anything else. Like you would go, if you go into your All Programs menu, find the ArcGIS folder and open it up, there is something called the Python command prompt. If you right-click it, run it as an administrator, you start up in the environment that has ArcGIS, the ArcPy, and ArcGIS API for Python packages accessible to you. You can type Jupyter Notebook there and start working with it on your system. And then you can import additional Python modules that way, but you can do it through Conda packages. You can install Conda packages into that environment. Pro also has a way to manage that behind the scenes in a GUI format. So no, you don't need to install anything else if you've got Pro 2.1. You can connect to that notebooks.esri.com server and enter in the credentials for your organization, and then you can do your work that way if you choose. But as it will time out on you if you let it sit for more than 10 minutes. So you can certainly play around and practice with stuff there.
But you can save the notebook.
You can save the notebook down.
Save it down local and then go back. Okay.
Yeah, you can save it locally and then upload it back up to that environment.
Yeah, real quick, let me show you the upload option. We didn't show you that earlier. There's an upload button in Jupyter Notebook. And this is used a lot of times to share between two people that are using Jupyter Notebooks. So you do upload, and then you find where your notebook is. You click on it, click open, and it's like Zombieland. You got to double tap. So you got to click it again so it uploads it. It's easy to forget the second upload button click. So yes, you click once, and then you click another time, and it uploads it up into your local copy of the Jupyter Notebook. Or if you want to play around with the notebooks, you can upload someone that someone else gave you, and you're like, I'm new to this, I want to upload it up onto the notebooks.esri.com, and then you can play around with it there. So you can go up and down as much as you want. And one more thing, and then we'll go back to the questions. I just wanted to show you, we said that you can use you can use scripts outside of Jupyter Notebook. Here's an example of what a script would look like in PyCharm. So any Python IDE, you can write the script, or you can export it out to from Jupyter Notebook into a PY, open it up, and then run it through the OS or run it through a Python IDE. Okay, back to questions. I think there was a hand over here. Oh, okay, yeah. PyCharm would be one of them. You can run it right in a Python development environment like PyCharm or Spider or whatever, Wing, whatever you like using. Or you can work through the OS to run it through a scheduler.
Okay,
so
digitally,
you'd run it just like any other Python script that you would run on your operating system. The only thing you need to make sure is that you're pointing it to the right Python executable or your interpreter so it knows how to understand that code and run that code. So you could run it on any OS too. I mean, like, Mac, Windows, it doesn't matter. And that's very handy for administrative workflows that you might want to schedule it to run in the middle of the night when the servers are not busy.
Yes? Were all the examples available on notebooks.esri.com? No, not all of them. Like some of the ones that I showed about organ administration workflows of printing out users and data. I have those, but can make them accessible to you. Stop by the island and I can make them accessible. And don't forget to use the Esri Events app and take the digital survey and tell them about the 5-star presentation you just witnessed.
And a lot of, too, to add on to what John said about his notebooks that he used, the stuff I did too, a lot of that stuff comes from the guide up here or comes from the samples, even though we wrote it ourselves.
Yeah, most of it is on there. But there were a couple notebooks that I was jacking around with yesterday that I finally got to work last night.
Because the guide is full of little snippets of code, so lots of good stuff up there. Yeah.
Question over there. What you have to be, so his question is about PyCharm, or this is true of any IDE. When you set up the project or whatever the mechanism is in that IDE, you just have to make sure that you set it to the interpreter that is in the environment, because each environment that you create is using a different Python interpreter to execute the code. That's how the package management works at the Anaconda level. So any IDE, as long as you know that pathway, and that command on your command, if you type conda space info space -e, it will list you all your environments and the pathway to the interpreter.
And what I have on the screen right here is where I have set the Python interpreter. You can see there's the one that I have in my Python API folder that I've downloaded the API through Anaconda. Because I'm working with a Mac, I don't have Pro. I'm just using it through the Anaconda install.
Well, thank you for attending. Oh, one more question. Yeah, I wouldn't call it a virtual machine. You're setting up physical locations on your system that are isolated from each other. And correct, you can create environment 1 that's running Python 2, environment 2 that's running Python 3, and any of the iterations within it. You are in control of what your environment is. Like, you have the ability to manage what packages are in there. And then there's a separate interpreter for that environment that then you need to access when you want to use that stuff. You can install it through Docker.
I just pulled up the help menu for Docker. So that's a stripped down VM that strips a lot of the OS stuff away, so it's real lightweight and it doesn't use a lot of memory. And I believe that's what we're notebooks.arcgis.com is actually using Docker images.
Yes, correct.
Yep. So yeah, check out that help talk if you're interested in like a separate sandbox environment to install the API.
That's actually a really useful thing to have. You install your own notebook server next to it with any client and your notebook will persist.
Yeah, so he said it's a really, to read what the comment was, it's a really good way to connect to it via a thin client. So, okay.
Oh, one more thing. A SQL query walks into a bar, sees two tables over in a corner and asks, mind if I join you?
Thanks, everyone.